take a fucking two. A problem that many people who play games on older consoles face is whether they should buy OEM, clone, or Retrofighters controllers for their older consoles. And I do mean consoles. Retrofighters at this point make game controllers for just about every console you would want to play. They have NES, N64, GameCube, Genesis, Saturn, Dreamcast, original Xbox, and every generation of PlayStation. 12 whole systems that you can buy controllers for, specially designed for, by Retrofighters. And 12 different systems where you can also buy original OEM controllers and clones. So even though Xbox is my example here, I think this is a generally applicable topic. And Retrofighters are my choice here, partially because that's what I have, and also because, especially in modern years, they've become very prolific and very well-liked controller manufacturers for older consoles. So, let's start with an overview. This Hyperkin Duke is here as a stand-in for Xbox's original controller design, which I do not have a working model of right now. This is the S controller, a redesign of this controller. This is OEM, straight from Microsoft in 2002 knows when. This is a cheap clone made by some nobody manufacturer of the S controller. This is Retrofighters' Hunter controller for the original Xbox. We can start our comparison by going over what's good about each category, starting with first-party controllers. These are going to be what games you'll play on the console were originally designed for. They are going to play right, and the button prompts are going to look right almost 100% of the time. And if you're a fan of any weird first-party controllers for a console, then you're obviously going to get that weirdness by buying that first-party controller. Clones are cheap. They're way cheaper than buying a used first-party controller or a Retrofighters controller. They're really just here because I happen to have one. They're good as a backup controller or as something to play multiplayer games with if you don't have much of cash to buy extra first-party controllers, but they're not really recommendable outside of that. And Retrofighter controllers are really well designed. They feel great. This one feels incredible, actually. Its buttons are a little better, I think, than the original Xbox controller's buttons, while still being fully analog, still having that full feature. Its triggers, even though they're molded more like a modern Xbox controller, which I'm not usually a fan of, they have such good feel and such good response that I don't have any problems with them. And the sticks feel great, even if I happen to prefer the asymmetric style of original Xbox sticks. And the D-pad feels about 100 times better than any D-pad Microsoft has ever put on any controller. So generally, I'd say it's a win on quality. It's also going to be a win on the fact that it's just newer. OEM controllers, like... Oh, gotta grab this off screen real quick. OEM controllers, Jesus, like this one, are going to be old. They're, next year, just about, there aren't going to be any original Xbox controllers that are under the age of 20. You are going to have to buy used, and that means worn down sticks and frail old plastics, as well as the high chance that the controller will be filthy, and you'll have to spend an hour or more cleaning it before you even start using it. And for a lot of people, just having a worn down controller is gonna be a deal breaker when you can get something newer, oftentimes if you're restricted to looking online, for about the same price. Clone controllers are... Oh, that's the wrong one. Clone controllers aren't much better than OEM when it comes to being worn down. Despite using this barely as much as my OEM controller, this thing feels like it's falling apart already. And it feels terrible to use. The sticks are slidey, not in a good way. The buttons feel cheap, they just feel bad. Especially these menu buttons. These feel like garbage. And these sticks are somehow both terrible in different ways. The left trigger is so light and hollow that I feel like I'm only interacting with the spring that keeps pushing it out, while as the right trigger feels like I am slowly tearing a hole in the controller's body just by using it. And Retrofighters controllers don't have either of those problems, but do have a more abstract problem, which I mentioned earlier. Particularly, the fact that they aren't the same design as your OEM controller. I am a really big fan of the original Xbox controller. I think it does things with ergonomics that no modern controller is doing, and is just as creative and intentional and good of a design as the GameCube controller that it was up against at the time. It places everything exactly where it needs to be. The buttons fall on a clean arc of where your thumb is going to be on both sides, culminating in a slight but not arduous reach to the menu buttons. And the triggers, because you don't have actual shoulder buttons on the original version, these were added, I think mistakenly, by Hyperkin. Because there's no shoulder buttons, the triggers can be recessed under the body of the controller a good distance, which makes it much more comfortable to hold than PlayStation controllers, despite being smaller. I mean, my thumb is basically over my finger here, and that's just going to be an easier hold than even something like this, where my finger's having to stretch a lot more. And you may not agree with me on the original Xbox, but for other consoles that Retrofighters are making controllers for, like the GameCube, you might decide that it's not worth losing the particular and intentional design of the OEM controller just for something that feels more standard and more modern, like the Retrofighters option does. So then, a conclusion. Which of these three options do I think you should buy? Well, in case you can't tell by looking at the screen, I think all three of them are worth buying in some cases. OEM controllers are something I think you should have at least one of for your retro console. They're in many cases, very exclusive in what features they have, especially for 5th to 7th gen consoles. You're not going to be able to meet all of the weird features they were trying to pack into controllers at the time. And they're going to hit a quality standard that is very hard to when you're not a first-party console manufacturer. I think the clones are a great option for multiplayer on a budget. If you're not too good in the money department, but you still want to play Halo 2 with your roommate, get one of these for now, and you'll be able to at least play multiplayer at all. And I think Retrofighters are doing something incredible by offering modern wireless controllers for these old consoles. I think this is one of the best retro gaming products available today. And I think that if you just want a bog standard modern feeling controller for your console, which a lot of the times even I do, then you should be going with Retrofighters if you have the money to get Retrofighters. And you probably do if you also have the cash to get a good quality first-party controller for one of these older consoles. Though, if you play Retrofighters too much, I don't know how long these last. This one's very new. Maybe it won't last as long as these OEMs have. And don't be surprised when your roommate stops playing games with you the 5th time you make him use the cheap, terrible clone controller.